A little bit of awkwardness or nervousness is to be expected. Meeting somebody for the first time that you're going to be sharing your deepest secrets with or your biggest problems and struggles with is obviously not going to be the most comfortable setting. So don't be surprised if you feel a bit awkward, if you feel a bit nervous. It's to be expected. Even me as a therapist, when I meet clients for the first time, I am a nervous wreck. I've talked about that a few times in my last video and in my first ever placement vlog. I shared with you guys how nervous I was. I'm not going to speak for clients and say that it's more nerve-wracking for clients or therapists, but for me personally, I have been more nervous coming into a situation as a therapist than when I've come into a situation as a client. I haven't been that nervous to meet my therapists at all, if ever, but I've definitely been nervous to be a therapist and to meet clients for the first time. I hope that puts some of your nerves at ease. Maybe knowing that your therapist is probably as nervous or more nervous than meeting you. I don't know. So let's get into the stuff that you can expect in your first ever therapy session. So if you haven't had any initial contact with your therapist on the phone or via email beyond arranging your first session, so you haven't talked about anything else except when you're going to meet and maybe what you're coming to therapy for, you're probably going to have to do that in the session. So over the phone maybe or via email, you obviously maybe would have talked about a few other things. Let's say you haven't done that. When you come in for your first session, you're going to go through a contract, payments, boundaries, expectations for both of you, whether this is ongoing, open-ended, short-term therapy, admin stuff, and potentially planning your future sessions. But that will probably happen at the end of the session. So that will probably be maybe the first 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, depending on if you have any questions or if you're not sure about stuff. Because normally with my clients at the school, I give them the contract, explain to them what it is, and then they read it through. So that takes about a minute or two. And then if they have any questions, they ask me and then they sign it if they want to. And then we start the session. So that's about 5 minutes. So it all just depends really. So some therapists might just do a verbal contract where they just talk and say, are you okay with this? Are you okay with that? Some therapists will give you a physical paper to sign, or obviously if they've already emailed you beforehand, they might have just given you it to read and sign online before the first session. And some of them might have already given you an assessment sheet, depending on what type of therapy they're doing, to maybe just assess where you're at and what you're coming to therapy for. And if, like I said, if that hasn't been done before, then they might do the assessment in session. It's really important here that you're open and honest about what you're here for and the level of risk, if there is any at all. You share it and you're open about it so that you're protected and your therapist is protected. Some therapists might provide a little bit of psychoeducation. So if this is your first time coming to therapy, maybe you're with a CBT therapist or a psychodynamic therapist or somatic or systematic therapist, you might be like, what on earth is that? What is it? How does it work? So some therapists might briefly explain, sit and talk about themselves essentially, just so you know a little bit about their profession. So they might explain the qualifications they've got, the training they've got, and the type of therapy that they're going to be working with you using. So they might explain how CBT works and what it is. If you're confused about it, now you know. And so that in a way you kind of are able to understand why they're doing what they're doing in their session. So because certain approaches will use certain techniques more than others. For example, CBT uses a lot of homework, a lot of practical stuff, a lot of practicing stuff outside of the sessions, whereas maybe with psychodynamic it's more so just sitting and talking about the past a lot. So depending on your therapist's approach, they might just explain it a little bit to you so that you're not like shocked or wondering why they're doing what they're doing. Somatic therapy is very body focused, so there'll be a lot of questions about how you're feeling. Is your body grounded? Can you feel certain feelings in your chest, in your stomach, in your legs? How do you feel? So there's a lot of that. So it just depends. So they might explain to you a little bit briefly about what they do and how it works. I personally haven't had psychoeducation because I've gone to therapists as a trainee counsellor, so I already know what type of therapy they're providing and stuff like that. So after this, then hopefully the therapist should start and kind of explain and kind of just ask you to take the floor essentially and say, you know, what is it that you'd like to talk about? What would you like to bring to therapy? What would you like to share? You know, this is your time to shine. And yeah, give a backstory as to what's brought you to therapy, what you'd like to gain from therapy. If you have any goals, if you don't, that's also fine. So for the remainder of the session, it'll be mainly just to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And then towards the end, some therapists will take the time at the end of the session to kind of summarize everything that you've spoken about. They might ask you how you found your first session with them and if you'd like to come back again. or if not. And then unless you've already agreed that your sessions are going to be every week or every 2 weeks at a certain time, they might get out their diary and plan when your next session is just before you finish, just before you go. Some therapists are happy to kind of go week by week. My therapist at the moment is happy for me to kind of book week by week, whatever day and availability I've got. With my supervisors, every 2 weeks at a certain time, so we have that set in stone. But I think depending on the service that you're using, some therapists might be more flexible with timetabling and scheduling sessions. Some might be very rigid and say you have to stick to the same time every week. So it just depends really on where you go. So I hope that settles your nerves, and hopefully you won't feel too scared or nervous for your first session. I really do wish you the best. You will be absolutely fine. After this, I highly recommend watching the things that you need to do before your first therapy session, which I did a year ago. So be sure to watch that next. And don't be surprised because I am wearing the same t-shirt in the same video, okay? Bye.